Welcome to Ethan's Revenge.
Grant leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "We need more agility, not security theater," he said, eyes sharp behind designer glasses. "Speed wins in this market, Marcus." I kept my expression neutral. "My name is Marcus Liu, 40 years old, and for nearly a decade, I've been the lead security architect at Nexra Labs. I built the systems that protect the sensitive financial data of over 300 clients. Systems that, until recently, had never been breached." Grant didn't care about that. He was the new CTO, brought in after the Veritech acquisition. His mandate? Accelerate growth, cut costs, and streamline operations. Translation: reduce security overhead. "Our clients trust us because we've never had a major breach," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "That's not luck. That's architecture. It's years of layered defenses, segmented databases, and proactive monitoring." Grant waved his hand dismissively. "Everyone has breaches. The difference is how quickly you recover. That's where the real money is." I could feel the temperature drop in the room. He wasn't just challenging my approach. He was setting the tone for a complete overhaul, and I knew what that meant. Speed over stability. Profits over protection. After the meeting, Diane from Product stopped me in the hallway. She had that sympathetic look people get when they see someone heading for a professional car crash. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low. That was harsh. I forced a tight smile. "I'm fine. Just a difference in philosophy." But I wasn't fine. I could feel the ground shifting under me. I'd seen this before: new leadership coming in, obsessed with cutting corners, convinced they could outrun their own security flaws. 2 days later, the first signs appeared. My access to the critical security logs was suddenly restricted. When I asked IT, they said it was a policy update from Grant's office. The next morning, I found my firewall rule modification rights downgraded. My custom monitoring dashboard? Locked. The system I'd spent years refining to catch anomalies before they became breaches was being dismantled, piece by piece. That night, I backed up every piece of documentation I had, not the company's data, but my own notes, architecture diagrams, and code snippets. The kind of tribal knowledge you don't write down unless you see a storm coming. I didn't know exactly what Grant had planned, but I knew one thing. If he thought he could rip out my security protocols and replace them with off-the-shelf solutions, he was making a mistake. A mistake that would cost them. As I closed my laptop that night, I felt a cold, detached calm. They were going to learn the hard way that speed without structure is just a countdown to chaos. And when the cracks started to show, I'd be the only one who knew how to stop the bleeding. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning for the inevitable. 3 days after that tense meeting, I found my access to the core security logging server restricted. I logged in to check the real-time activity feeds, the ones I'd personally configured to catch early signs of intrusions, and was greeted with an error message. "Access denied." My heart rate didn't spike. I didn't panic. I just leaned back in my chair and stared at the blinking cursor, a slow, simmering realization settling in. Grant was moving faster than I had expected. I sent a quick message to the IT help desk, keeping my tone neutral. "Hey, my access to the security logs seems to be blocked. Is this a mistake?" The response came faster than I thought it would. New policy from the CTO's office. Security logs are now consolidated under centralized monitoring. If you have concerns, please direct them to Grant. Of course. Centralized. Streamlined. Optimized for speed, not for depth. Grant had made his first cut, and it was a deep one. I leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes unfocused as I ran the numbers in my head. My custom monitoring system had been catching early signs of breaches for years. It was the digital equivalent of a hunting dog, sensitive to the faintest scent of trouble. Without it, they'd be flying blind. I checked the new centralized dashboard they'd put in place. It was sleek, polished, full of pretty graphs and dashboards. Useless for actual threat hunting. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, the old rhythms of a well-defended network being replaced by the chaotic beats of a rushed transition. I knew what came next: the cost-cutting, the shortcuts, the compromises. That night, I copied my personal documentation to a secure offline drive. Years of architecture notes, custom code, undocumented firewall rules, the kind of tribal knowledge that can't be found in any corporate wiki. I wasn't planning revenge, but I also wasn't planning to go down with the ship. The next morning, I tested a theory. I attempted to modify a critical firewall rule, something I'd done 1,000 times without a second thought. Access denied. They had stripped my admin rights. I sat back, exhaled slowly, and felt a strange sense of clarity. They weren't just pushing me aside. They were cutting me out. Later that day, James, my direct report, stopped by my desk. He looked nervous, glancing around before speaking. Grant asked me to sit in on your security reviews from now on, he said, voice low. He wants to, decentralize the process. Said it'll make us more agile. I just smiled, cold and tight. Of course. Makes sense. James hesitated, then lowered his voice even more. Should I be worried? I met his eyes. That depends, I said. Do you trust the people making these decisions? He swallowed, nodded, and walked away. I watched him go, my mind already spinning through contingency plans. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being erased. And I was starting to understand why. 3 days after my termination, I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was a message from Jason, one of the junior analysts. Hey, you got a minute to talk? Something weird with the logs. I rubbed my eyes, swung my feet over the side of the bed, and replied, What's going on? Seconds later, he called. His voice was strained, words coming out too fast. Marcus, something's off with the logs. East Data Center activity doesn't add up. Timestamps are all over the place, and I'm seeing traffic from unknown IPs. I took a deep breath, already feeling the tension creeping into my morning. I poured myself a cup of coffee as Jason stumbled through his explanation. I knew the kid well enough to recognize when he was genuinely scared. Did you check the secondary validation logs? I asked, leaning against the counter, trying to focus. Silence. The what? I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course, he didn't know. I hadn't had the time to train the junior staff on all the hidden layers of the system, the fail-safes and custom scripts I'd built over years. They weren't in the standard documentation because they weren't supposed to be. All right, listen, I said, choosing my words carefully. Open the server control panel and look for a task named VerifyGate. I heard frantic typing on the other end. Okay, got it. But it's disabled. I clenched my jaw. Who disabled it? I don't know. It just says modified by admin. I exhaled slowly, feeling my pulse pick up. They'd started pulling my system apart without knowing what they were touching. My custom quarantine trigger, the one I designed to isolate compromised nodes, was offline. Listen carefully, I said, my voice dropping a notch. Enable that task, rerun the logs, and look for entries tagged with quarantine trigger. That's the first step. All right, thanks, Marcus. I owe you one. I hung up and sat back down at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold. I had handed over my credentials, given them every chance to transition smoothly, and this was how they handled it? I should have expected this. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a name I hadn't seen since I walked out of the conference room, Grant. Marcus, his tone was tight, controlled. We need to talk. I smiled, a slow, satisfied grin. About what, Grant? We've got a potential breach. Jason says you might know something about the alerts we're getting. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the window. The street outside moved at its usual, oblivious pace. Of course, I said, keeping my voice even, but this time, it's consultant rates. $1,000 an hour. Paid up front. A sharp silence followed, then, give me an hour. I'll get back to you. I hung up, topped off my coffee, and let the moment sink in. They had underestimated the one person who understood their security better than anyone. And now, they were about to pay the price. Grant called back exactly 47 minutes later. His tone was less controlled this time. I could almost hear the tension in his jaw through the line. Marcus, we need you back in the building. It's a mess. I'm willing to authorize the consulting rate you mentioned. I let the silence stretch for a moment, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the framed patent certificate on my wall, the one I'd earned for the custom data isolation system they were now struggling to understand. That's not how this works, Grant, I replied, my voice calm. I'm not coming back into the office. You can either pay my rate, up front, or figure this out on your own. He hesitated. All right, fine, he said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. Email me the contract terms. We'll get it processed today. I could tell he wasn't used to being cornered. The arrogance that had oozed from him during our last meeting had been replaced by a nervous edge. He was starting to realize just how deep this hole was. I hung up without another word and immediately drafted a contract for pages, airtight. $1,000 per hour, minimum 20 hours, no liability for damages, and a full waiver of my non-compete clause for any future engagements. I hit send. 2 hours later, my phone lit up again. This time, it was Stephen Wright, Next for his CEO. Marcus, I just spoke to Grant. He says you've put a consulting agreement on the table. I want to make sure we're clear on expectations before we proceed. I chuckled softly, swirling the bourbon in my glass. It was early, but I felt like celebrating. I'm listening, I said. We need you to come in, assess the situation, and help us contain it. This isn't just a glitch. We're seeing unusual traffic, possible lateral movement between client databases. Lateral movement. My system was supposed to prevent that, unless they disabled the critical segmentation controls. All right, I replied, my tone neutral. But understand this, Stephen. I'm not walking into a mess you created and then taking the blame when it all goes south. My contract is clear. I'm an external consultant now, nothing more. He sighed. Fine. Just help us contain this, Marcus. We'll make it right. I doubted that, but I agreed to a remote session the next morning. After I hung up, I opened my personal backup drive and reviewed the last set of architecture notes I'd copied before they shut down my access. I poured another glass, leaning back as the sun dipped behind the Seattle skyline. They wanted my help. They needed my expertise. But they had no idea just how much they'd broken. I smiled, feeling the familiar edge of control returning. Tomorrow, I'd walk them through the ruins of their own arrogance. And I'd make them pay for every second of it. I dialed in at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning. They'd set up a secure line, but the connection felt shaky, a fitting metaphor for the situation they created. Grant's voice crackled through first. He sounded strained, like he hadn't slept. Marcus, thanks for joining. We've got Diane from Product, James from Network Ops, and Heather from HR on the line. HR. Interesting. I made a mental note of that. All right, I said, keeping my tone flat. Walk me through the symptoms. There was a brief rustle of papers. Grant started. We're seeing abnormal traffic on multiple client segments. Unusual login attempts. The internal segmentation is failing. Data is moving between client silos. I closed my eyes. Defined failing. Silence. Then James chimed in. The segmentation controls are behaving inconsistently. Some databases are still isolated, but others are bleeding into shared network paths. I leaned back, letting a slow breath out through my nose. Which databases? Grant hesitated. The high-value clients. Banks, private equity funds, wealth management firms. Of course. The accounts with the strictest data isolation requirements. The ones I'd personally locked down with custom rules after a near-miss breach 2 years ago. All right, I said, pulling up my old architecture notes. Did you disable the auto-quarantine task? Silence. Grant. Yes, he admitted, his voice tight. It was flagged as a performance bottleneck during the restructuring. I almost laughed. They'd stripped out the very mechanism designed to stop this exact kind of lateral movement. That was your first mistake, I said, my tone hardening. The quarantine task isn't just a security feature, it's the backbone of the entire data isolation strategy. Without it, every client database is effectively sitting on a shared floor with open doors. I heard someone whisper something on the other end. Probably Diane, realizing the full weight of the error. Can you reactivate it? I asked. Grant cleared his throat. That's part of the problem. The task isn't just disabled, it's been deleted from the management console. I bit back a curse. Deleted? Are you serious? James cut in. I found the server logs. It was removed 3 days after you left, along with several other processes marked as legacy by Grant's directive. I felt a slow burn of anger creeping up my spine. They hadn't just cut corners, they'd ripped out the entire foundation without understanding what it held up. All right, I said, my voice turning colder. Here's what you're going to do. Set up a separate, isolated admin console. I'll walk you through a temporary patch to contain this mess. But make no mistake, this is a band-aid, not a cure. Grant's voice came back, quieter this time. Understood. I leaned forward, eyes narrowing. This wasn't just a breach anymore. This was the first crack in the walls I'd built, and I intended to make them feel every inch of it. I spent the next 2 hours walking James through the temporary patch. It was a clumsy fix, a digital tourniquet, not a real solution, but it would at least stop the bleeding. I had him redirect the high-value client databases through a separate VLAN, isolating them from the compromised segments. Is the secondary verification still disabled? I asked, already suspecting the answer. James hesitated. Yeah. Grant had the network team consolidated into the main monitoring suite. Said it was redundant. I closed my eyes, letting the frustration settle before speaking. Of course he did. I made James re-enable the task, then walked him through adding an additional layer of logging to capture the lateral movement patterns. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd stripped out my systems, called them outdated, and were now scrambling to recreate them in a crisis. When we finished, James exhaled audibly over the line. That should hold for now. No, I corrected him. It'll slow the breach, but it won't stop it. The attacker is already inside. You're playing defense in a game you don't understand. He went quiet, the reality of the situation settling in. Thanks, Marcus, he said finally. I mean it. I didn't respond. Just ended the call and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Grant this time. Marcus, he started, his tone strained. We appreciate you stepping in, but we need a longer-term solution. Can we bring you in as a consultant? Maybe just for a few weeks until this blows over. I felt a flicker of dark satisfaction. They'd gone from cutting me loose to begging me for help in under a week. I told you my rate, I said, keeping my voice flat. For our minimum, paid up front. And I'll need full access to the systems. No half measures. Grant hesitated. I'll run it by the board. But, Marcus, can I ask you something? I waited. Did you know this would happen? I let the question hang in the air for a moment. I knew you were playing with fire, I said finally. I just didn't expect you to pour gasoline on the floor before lighting the match. He sighed, the kind of exhausted, defeated sound I'd only heard from him once before, the day he realized I was 3 steps ahead in every technical argument we ever had. I'll get back to you, he said, voice smaller now. Take your time, I replied. The fire's not going anywhere. I ended the call, tossed my phone onto the table, and leaned back. This wasn't just a technical failure. It was a collapse of the very architecture I'd built, and I had no intention of letting them rebuild it without me. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, I got an email from Nexra's HR department. The subject line read, Consulting Agreement. Urgent. I opened it, skimming the dense legalese. They were offering my full contractor rate, $800 per hour, minimum 40 hours per week, plus a retainer to be paid up front. Desperation, neatly formatted. I replied with a short, direct response. I will require full administrative access and immunity from liability for any pre-existing security issues. If this is acceptable, I can start Monday. An hour later, Grant called. Marcus, I've reviewed the terms. The board is on board. Just one condition, we need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I almost laughed. After all the chaos they'd invited into their network, they were worried about secrets. I'll sign it, I replied. But understand this. If I find out that anything was intentionally disabled or tampered with to cut costs, I walk. No second chances. Grant paused, probably realizing he had no choice. Understood, he said, his voice tight. We'll have the paperwork over by the end of the day. I hung up and leaned back, letting the irony wash over me. They'd fired me to save money, cut corners, and speed up development. Now they were about to pay me more than my previous annual salary just to contain the mess they created. The paperwork arrived an hour later, along with a separate message from Stephen Wright, the CEO. It was short but laced with a tone that tried to sound firm, even as it reeked of desperation. Marcus, we appreciate your willingness to step in during this challenging time. Please consider this an opportunity to help rebuild a stronger Nexra. I chuckled as I signed the agreement. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about rebuilding. It was about survival. I sent the signed contract back, then grabbed my jacket and walked down to the waterfront. The air was crisp, the sky a muted gray. I leaned against the railing, watching the ferries cut through the waves, and allowed myself a small, private smile. They thought this was about fixing the system, but I had no intention of just patching holes. I was going to take back control of the architecture I'd built, brick by digital brick. And this time, I'd make damn sure no one could dismantle it without me. The next morning, I'd be back in their office, not as an employee, but as the one man who could save them from their own arrogance. And I had every intention of making them pay for every minute of it. Monday morning, I walked back into Nexra's office for the first time since they'd handed me my severance. The receptionist looked up, eyes widening in surprise. She fumbled for her headset, probably about to call security, but then caught herself when I flashed my temporary consultant badge. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The air felt different, tense, the kind of charged silence that clings to a place on the brink of collapse. As I stepped out, I saw James pacing near the server room door, phone clutched to his ear. He looked up, eyes catching mine, and for a second, relief flooded his face. Marcus, he mouthed, ending his call and jogging over. Thank God. It's chaos. Nobody knows what's going on. I nodded. I'm here to fix it. I made my way to the main conference room. Grant was already inside, surrounded by whiteboards covered in frantic scribbles, IP addresses, network paths, hastily drawn diagrams. He looked up as I entered, his jaw tightening, eyes narrowing like a cornered predator. "Marcus," he said, trying to sound composed but failing. "Glad you could make it." I didn't bother with pleasantries. I pulled a chair back, opened my laptop, and started connecting to the internal network. "Walk me through what you found." Grant hesitated. He still hadn't figured out how to play this. He needed me, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. "We've isolated the entry point," he said finally, "but the intruder is moving laterally. They've already hit 40 client databases, and we can't lock them out. Every time we block an IP, they reroute through a different node." I pulled up my custom dashboard, the one they'd neglected in their restructuring. Sure enough, the internal quarantine system was offline. They'd never re-enabled it after cutting my protocols. "You disabled the auto lockdown," I said, eyes still on my screen. Grant stiffened. "We consolidated processes. It was supposed to reduce system overhead." I bit back a bitter laugh. "And you just handed them the keys to the kingdom." I started typing commands, reconnecting the quarantine protocols, isolating client databases one by one. The internal firewalls began to flicker back to life, their automated defenses snapping into place. Grant leaned over my shoulder, trying to follow the code on my screen. "What are you doing?" "What you should have never turned off," I replied. "Rebuilding the walls you tore down." The system log scrolled rapidly, alert after alert lighting up as I reactivated my custom triggers. Within minutes, the intruder's pathways started closing off, the digital corridors they'd used collapsing around them. "You see that?" I said, leaning back. "That's what a real security system looks like." Grant's face drained of color as he realized just how badly he'd miscalculated. I didn't smile. I just kept typing. Because this was only the beginning. As I worked through the tangled mess of compromised code and exposed data, the full scale of the breach became clear. The intruder hadn't just been poking around. They were siphoning data, slowly, deliberately. Financial records, transaction histories, sensitive client profiles, it was all there, laid bare because Grant had cut the tendons of the security system without understanding what held it together. I isolated another segment, forcing a redirect of traffic through a series of backup nodes I'd built years ago. The logs lit up, confirming the change. The intruder's access paths began to shrink, their options narrowing as I methodically closed the gaps. Grant hovered beside me, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "How bad is it?" he asked, voice tight. I didn't look up. "Bad. You've got at least 40 clients exposed. Maybe more. If they pull this data, Nexra's finished." He let out a shaky breath, stepping back like he'd been physically struck. "What do you need?" I paused, hands hovering over the keyboard. This was my moment. I could ask for anything, a blank check, a reinstatement, control over the entire security team. But I didn't want those things. I just wanted this done. "I need everyone out of my way," I said finally, eyes still on the code. "No interruptions. No second-guessing. You listen to me, or this place burns." Grant hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. Whatever it takes." I dove back in, my fingers moving faster now, typing command after command, bypassing the crippled infrastructure Grant's changes had left behind. I reactivated hidden systems, triggered long-dormant failsafes, and began rebuilding the segmented network that had once made Nexra a fortress. Alerts flashed on my screen, attempts by the intruder to pivot to a different segment. I shut them down, one by one, like slamming doors in their face. "What the hell is that?" Grant whispered, watching the screen. "They're still trying?" I glanced at him. "Of course they are. You left the gates open. They think they own this place now." I activated the final layer of defense, the self-sealing quarantine I designed for exactly this kind of scenario. The last of the client databases locked down, and the external connections severed. The logs fell silent. I leaned back, exhaled, and closed my laptop. "It's done." Grant stared at me, wide-eyed. "You stopped them." I met his gaze, my voice low, controlled. "No. I buried them." I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out without another word, leaving Grant alone in the flickering light of a dozen monitors still scrolling error messages. Because this time, I didn't just save their data. I took my legacy back. I didn't go back the next day. I woke up, made coffee, and took a long walk along the waterfront. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you feel the edge of every breath. I watched the ferries drift across the sound, white wakes cutting through the dark water, and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. My phone buzzed. Several missed calls. A dozen new messages. All from Grant. I didn't answer. Later, I got a text from Diane. Grant's losing it. He's calling an emergency board meeting. They're talking about a full leadership shakeup. Just thought you should know. I pocketed my phone and kept walking. The city felt different, like it had shed a weight along with me. By noon, I was back at my apartment, scrolling through LinkedIn. Sentinel Security Group had posted a new position for a lead security architect. I sent a message to Elaine. You still looking to expand your financial sector practice? Her reply came within minutes. For you? Absolutely. Can you come in tomorrow? I'll be there. I smiled, tossed my phone on the couch, and opened my laptop. I drafted a single, short email to Stephen Wright, Nextra's CEO. Subject, resignation. Stephen. Effective immediately, I am resigning my position as lead security architect. I appreciate the opportunity to have built Nextra's security framework over the past 9 years. I wish you the best of luck as you navigate the current challenges. Regards. Marcus Liu. I hit send without a second thought. That evening, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life as the sun dipped below the skyline. I thought about all the late nights, the constant pressure, the ignored warnings. I thought about the sleepless weekends, the sacrifices, the moments I missed trying to keep a company safe from itself. I thought about Grant, the way his hand shook as he realized just how badly he'd miscalculated, the panic in his eyes as I locked down the last of the compromised servers. And then, I let it all go. The next morning, I walked into Sentinel's glass tower downtown. Elaine met me in the lobby, her handshake firm, her smile genuine. Welcome to the team, she said. We're lucky to have you. I followed her up to the 27th floor, where my new office overlooked the city. Clean. Modern. No ghosts. As I sat down at my new desk, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Because sometimes, walking away isn't a surrender. It's a reset. And this time, I wasn't just building a security system. I was building a future.